Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this panel discussion on the IDF ethics in combat and the law of armed conflict. My name is Adiha Yun Perez. I'm the IAC Bay Area Regional Director, and I'm very excited to welcome you to the IAC 9th National Summit. Our panelist for this discussion is John Spencer, Colonel Richard Kemp, and Yael Gvirsman. Leading this panel is Alon Ben David, Senior Defense Correspondent, Channel 13. Thank you so much, and please hold your question to the end. We will have time at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Adi, and thank you all for coming. I will tell you a little bit more about our speakers. Just by judging according to the preliminary discussion that we had before the panel, if we're going to start from there, it's going to be very interesting. So first of all, we have with us Yael Gvirsman from the Reichman University. She's an attorney specializing in the... Sorry? Okay. That's the first time I'm being told they can't hear me. And Yael is an attorney specializing in international criminal and humanitarian law. We also have with us Colonel Richard Kemp. Many of you probably know him. On top of being a British veteran commander, he also follows the war in Israel, has been on the ground in Gaza, and would share his perspective to the wars that he's been engaged in Afghanistan and other wars compared to Gaza. And we have with us John Spencer, who's the chair of Urban Warfare Studies. At the Modern War Institute at West Point. Now, we're in an interesting moment in time when the war is transforming from a conflict focusing mostly on Gaza to the north, and this is a good moment to look at what happened in Gaza throughout almost a year now. And I have to tell you from my own personal experience, I've been covering the Israeli military operations for 40 years. What I saw in Gaza and what Gaza witnessed during this war is something that no territory in the Middle East ever experienced. I don't think ever I've seen the Israeli military exercising its full might on an area against an enemy, and this is not a limited operation, and this is not a low-intensity conflict. This is a war with a very ambitious goal, destroying Hamas military capabilities and removing Hamas as the ruler of Gaza. More succeeded on the first one as on the second one. And Richard, I know you've been in Gaza recently and also in the northern border, and you hear the criticism about Israel and how the war is being conducted. I'm sure there's no criticism on the way that we went to war, because we had the most just cause you can imagine after the massacre of October 7th. But when you look at how the war is being conducted, and I have to say we crossed many precedents in this war, in the way we exercise our force. What's your impression on the way Israelis are using their force, operating against an enemy within a civilian population?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say how disappointed I am that there's no protesters here. Normally, when I speak at an event...
Hold on, we keep them as a surprise to the end.
We can arrange it later. Also, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of General Zilberman, who is the Israeli Defense Attaché in Washington. It's always a tremendous honor to be in the same room as an IDF soldier. I have enormous admiration and respect for the IDF in pretty much everything they do, and I'm sure many of you here as well have served in the IDF. And I'd like also to pay tribute to my fellow panelist, John Spencer, who has been, throughout this war, has been a tremendous voice of clarity, realism and honesty, quoted internationally, an international authority on urban conflict. And John, the work you've been doing, I think, has been incredibly valuable for not just Israel, but also for the Western world, the free world. I can't remember what the question was now. I think...
That was a very general one, allowing you to give the broadest perspective on the way IDF conducts its warfare against an enemy inside an urban civilian area.
Yeah, I did hear it. There was a feeble attempt at humour, so apologies. But I think, I mean, you made the point at the beginning that there's no question really about the way the war started and Israel's justification for fighting. But I would disagree with that. I think right from the very beginning, there's been enormous criticism of Israel just for going into Gaza, for retaliating against the attack it faced. And I remember on the 7th of October, I was in my home in England, and I watched the BBC. I try to avoid the BBC if I can, but the BBC came on. And there was an American professor being interviewed on the BBC, professor of war or something, who said this is a God-given opportunity for Netanyahu, who now wants to wreak as much destruction as he can on Gaza. And this is exactly what Israel was hoping would happen. On the 7th, before the full scale was even realized. So I think that's been the case, and it underlies all of the criticism of Israel that we've seen, I think, which is the idea that Israel is an illegitimate state. It has stolen land from the Arabs. It is an illegal occupier. It has illegal settlements, all of which are lies. But nevertheless, that's the narrative. And therefore, whatever happened to Israel, it had it coming. And whatever Israel does is wrong. So unfortunately, that's the reality of the narrative. The real situation on the ground, and as you mentioned, I've been into Gaza several times, and I've seen the IDF fighting firsthand. And I've also been following closely from discussions with Israeli officers and from media reports and every other kind of stuff that all of us see, following closely the way the war's going. My view is that the IDF has been conducting this campaign with outstanding degree of excellence. I don't believe there's any other army in the world that could have encountered the situation Israel's faced and handled it as efficiently and effectively as they have. And just to give you one statistic that is maybe open to question, it's not necessarily 100% accurate, but the IDF current assessment, I believe, is that they have killed around 20,000 Hamas and associated terrorists in Gaza since the war began. Around 20,000, they've killed them. Against that, something like, and you'll forgive me if I get this number wrong because it increases, unfortunately, from time to time. Against that, the IDF have sustained around about 250-something soldiers killed in action. That is a tremendous achievement. It's terrible, terrible. Every single one of those Israeli soldiers' lives, the loss of them is terrible. But the rule of thumb in most armies is that an attacking force, which the IDF is, sustains 3 times as many casualties as the defending force. And if you look at those statistics, that shows you the amazing accomplishments of the IDF in Gaza. In addition to that, we shouldn't forget, this is, in my view, this is the most complex battlefield any army has ever fought on in history. Not necessarily most intense. I was in Ukraine a few weeks before and several times before this war began, and I witnessed much more intense battlefields like Bakhmut, which is like a kind of mini Stalingrad. Far more intense, but nothing like as complex, army on army. Here we've got a terrain that's been prepared over decades for Israel to attack by Hamas, who have laid booby traps, they've laid mines, they've prepared escape routes, sniper positions, all of it. Very, very well prepared. Makes the job of an attacking army incredibly difficult. Then you have the very dense population, the urban areas, very densely packed, a huge problem for an attacking force to deal with. You then have, of course, the extraordinary tunnel network underneath Gaza. No army has ever faced anything on that scale before. There have been tunnels in different battlefields, nothing like that. And the way they've handled it, I was being briefed the other day by a general who was commanding 98th Division of the IDF, who's just finished commanding, and he was explaining the extraordinary complexities and the way they've developed their doctrine and their tactics in order to deal with it, fighting concurrently in the air, on the ground, and below ground, at the same time, doing everything they can to coordinate their movements to avoid sustaining more casualties than they absolutely have to.
Colonel, without underestimating Hamas, and we won't make that mistake again, I hope, but still Hamas is no match to the IDF capabilities. And when you look at the two parties fighting, Israel controls the air, the sea, has much superiority on firepower, controls the spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum, so there's no real match. But I wanted to you touched on the numbers, and you, John, conduct research on the conflict. Now, in the IDF, we have no body count. We are not counting the people that we killed. We do not take the bodies. We don't touch them. You visited Gaza, some areas where you visit in Gaza, you can smell the stench. There are many bodies that no one discovered so far. You know, I have friends commanding the Air Force Control Center who sometimes after a night shift tell me, you know, last night I killed about 1,000 people and many of them evaporated. There will be no memory of them because they just disappeared as I destroyed the building that they were in. So where do you get your data? How can you trust the data when we don't have accurate data? Hamas is publishing manipulated data. How do you find the right data?
Well, it's a good question, and Richard, thank you for those comments, and same to you, a light in the room of darkness of uninformed. I actually wrote my first article on October 11th saying this would be the challenges that the IDF would face in Gaza. You know, the tunnels, the defending military in dense urban combat, concrete, the civilian population. I had no idea that they would face a world of lies. A world of lies, not understanding what the law of war says on how to execute war. How does the law of war, law of armed conflict, rules of engagement work in urban warfare? But I also didn't know that numbers that aren't accurate, and this is where I came in from a historical context of every urban battle that has come before. I can tell you with strong clarity, there's never been a battle in the history of war where the world said, but what's your civilian to combatant ratio? And then the number that they go with, because there are numbers of what were the civilian casualties in previous battles, but they were developed long after. But we've also forgotten what war looks like, to be honest. And I was in some of the similar places in Ukraine, Kyiv, and other places studying those urban battles. I take the numbers that people publicly release. I don't do classified research. I do comparative analysis, so I can tell you what those numbers look like compared to other people's. I've never seen a battle where the world, literally every news organization of the world, takes the number of the terrorist organization.
Without question.
Without question.
Immediately.
Or even caveats, where it came from, what it includes, every person that has died in Gaza, to include those who died in Israel, raping, murdering, and killing Israelis are in that number. But I use those numbers, and this is why I use them and say, like, if I'm going to use Hamas's numbers, then I should use Israel's numbers, like the 20,000 combatants, and explain to people. But I spend 90% of my time now giving people 101 classes on war. What is a combatant? What is a non-combatant? What are the historical numbers? What does that number mean? Does the actual result of battle doesn't mean that somebody is being illegal. In my opinion, based on the research I've been doing, Gaza seems to be where the truth goes to die. As in, they think that Israel is being disproportionate because they don't know what the meaning of proportionality means. They think that Israel is being indiscriminate, although there's not a single evidence of Israel indiscriminately, as in not targeting enemy combatants. They say they're being excessive, all based on not the data on the ground or what Israel has done. And I know I'm quoted on this a lot because I study urban warfare for a living. There is something called civilian harm mitigation. I've never seen a combatant in all these other battles where the enemy says, I need as many of my population to die as possible. Not ISIS, not the Nazis, not the Japanese. That's the case. But in this situation, I have never seen a military do as much to prevent civilian casualties as the IDF have. I'll try to get to the numbers, but this is what we call civilian harm mitigation. What you can do as a military, despite what the enemy is doing to try to get their people killed, to separate the civilians, to get them out of harm's way, to reveal yourself every day. Israel has evacuated cities. They've notified people in ways nobody's ever done. They've used call-outs of entire neighborhoods. They have tactically paused their operation on a daily basis almost every day of the war for the pursuit of preserving civilian life despite Hamas. So I use the numbers that everybody uses. I just come to a different analysis based on everything that's come before in the history of time.
So Yael, help us understand the concept of proportionality.
Sure.
Because this is one of the main principles of international law. And you know, in previous conflicts, when you had, for example, collateral damage when trying to kill a commander of the other side and you had 2 civilians, you had to go all the way up to the prime minister to approve that. Here, the proportions have changed. And we see much wider margins of collateral damage when we are operating. I'll give you one example. We were following the Jabalia battalion commander for over a month. And Jabalia battalion commander made a habit of encircling himself with 50 family members. All the time. He was surrounded with 50 family members, women, children, elders. We called them by phone personally. We texted them. We told them, if you're gonna stay next to that person, you'll be in harm's way. We really plead for them to go. They didn't go eventually. You've seen the massive crater that was created in the place where he resides. We killed them all. 50 for one commander. How do you define proportionality?
So that's really the golden question, and good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. And it's a great honor to be sitting in between these two legends here, living legends, and I'm Israeli, and I have to tell you that it's so important to have lights from everywhere in the world. 7th of October was the darkest hour. For me, I'm still on 7th of October, 6:29 a.m., Tel Aviv with my family. My sister is living in the south. And just to tell you the immense amount of light that we received from action, from looking towards with Israeli society, but also from the outside. So thank you for speaking up and being very constant on your moral voices and so forth. I'd like to say a word. You know, this panel is about the law, international law, and the ethics. You know, and we're talking about fighting, and we're talking about yes, we didn't have a choice and so forth, but also you, Alon, you described this horrific reality of war. And before entering the legality or the ethics of the conduct of hostilities and proportionality, I think we have to say a word about the horrifying reality of war, and how we should never, ever, ever get used to that. You know, we're talking about one military going in one day wiping out 1,000 souls from this earth. You know, that should always horrify. I'm horrified by that, you know. I'd like to see an end to that. In order to now going into the conduct of hostilities and proportionality is at the center, it's at the core of conduct of hostilities. Is it legal? Is it lawful? Is it legitimate or not? Then you know, before that we have to remember that if we are here in this horrific situation, it's because a number of men woke up that morning and made a decision to open the doors of hell, nothing less. And we've all been in hell since. So we have to remember that. Given that, we're still all, and we have to be always committed to humanity. We have to be committed to the sanctity of life, to human dignity. We're fighting a just war, and we always have to, you know, we know that, and at the same time that we're right and everything, and you know, I'm living this, and my students are in the military, and I've lost, unfortunately, a former student, and I know, you know, why we're there and everything, but we really have to keep that place, I think, of the dilemma, not to give up on our dilemmas, and also to say a word that only democracies, you know, are in a place of dilemmas, because dictatorships, they're They don't have any dilemmas.
But among democracies, is there an agreed measurement of proportionality?
So the easy answer is no. States and militaries, they wrote the laws of war, the laws of armed conflict. They talked about proportionality, and on purpose, they didn't really say a ratio. Yeah, 1 to 50, or even distance. Let's say 400 square meter or 200 square meter of damage. Is that proportionate or not? Proportional or not? And there is no answer. This was written. Proportionality was written in the 40s, Geneva Conventions, and so forth. The idea is really not, in order to estimate legality of proportionality or not, it's not about the effect, it's not about the body counts, it's about what the reasonable military officer had in mind, his intent, what he knew, what he had to know, what was his target. And what did he know about the civilian casualties that we call collateral damage, but I don't want to use that, but that's the jargon, but I don't like that because of it makes us, lose sight of, this human sanctity. And these military officers make the decisions and they have to live with it. And what I love about these military officers who I meet every day for years, and I live with them, and maybe my children one day, is that they don't give up on these dilemmas. They live with this. They're not walking around, just with how wonderful we are about combating and everything. We have to have this fight, and we all want to see a day where we will not have to fight. So I think that should be the ethos. No, democracies did not define the number of proportionality. International criminal tribunals, where I work, where I lead a legal front now for the victims of October 7, survivors and those who didn't survive, and hostages and their families. I'm leading this legal front in international criminal tribunals. They themselves never defined proportionality. At the ICTY, International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia, there's a well-known case, Gotovina case. Even they didn't. So even afterwards, courts look at the cases and legality of the combat, the reality on the ground, and they have to say, did this military commander, was he acting lawfully when he was making this decision? And they have to take that, legality in hindsight, after you have the damage, after you have 1,000 people dying, after you have, you have to estimate whether the military necessity was proportional to the foreseeable civilian loss.
So,
Short answer is no.
To suit the criticism, Israel allowing the supply of the people in Gaza, including Hamas, which makes lots of profit from the supply pouring into Gaza. John, Israelis are watching astounded as they see those chains of trucks going into Gaza every day. See Hamas selling the humanitarian supplies that are being provided into Gaza, selling it to the citizens, making profit. Honestly, is Israel committed to feeding the enemy? Is this precedented?
Not precedented. I mean, all of this is unprecedented. Like Richard said, there's never been a military in the history of war who's faced this level of challenges in even the international context of mobile phones. We used to call it TikTok wars. Now we call it, I don't know what to call it, where every action is viewed through a soda straw but criticized with no awareness of what the law says or anything. Israel's efforts to feed with food, water, medical aid, vaccinations, the population of Gaza is unprecedented. Yes. The accusation that they are not isn't backed up by the data. Whatever it is, there's 3 types of lies in my world, in academic world, but it seems to be in mainstream media. Lies, damn lies, statistics. So no matter how much aid Israel has flooded into Gaza, like you said, the only people trying to stop that is Hamas, who attack Kerem Shalom, who attack anybody who tried to bring in the aid, because it's something they're trying to hold on to the power. Unprecedented, of course. Anything in the contrary, whether it's the number of trucks that were going in before the war that actually weren't carrying food, to the number of trucks that are going in today, it's really fascinating that you have that question. If you go there, and especially as much as Richard has, and you see the trucks, you see the field. And I went in July, I went to where the U.S. pier used to be.
Was supposed to be.
Well, yeah, but it was a field of aid, just waiting to be picked up. because of those organizations assisting with that. The answer is easily a no, but I think it's fascinating that there is this question still, or there's an accusation that Israel hasn't done everything reasonable, feasible, historic, unprecedented airdrops, fixing water pipes to aid the people. I mean, just the polio vaccination campaign, it's almost shocking.
But it also protects us.
Can I just add one point to that? And John may disagree with me here, I don't know, but I'm not aware of any war in history in which one of the warring parties, in this case Israel, has been fighting an enemy and supplying humanitarian aid into that very same battlefield.
I'd like to jump in. Can I jump in? So I'm the only Israeli in the panel, except for Yael, and I'm supposed to be the one jumping in, which is... So I think what law helps us in this question, this important question, humanitarian aid, is first to understand what are the obligations, so what is the law, and then we can disagree about the facts and the lies, damn lies, and statistics, you know? And it's important to say that a military does not have the obligation, absolutely not to feed the enemy, that's for sure not. Israel has the obligation to allow humanitarian supplies in, and it has the prohibition to starve a population. So, for example, the Balkan siege in Sarajevo, starving the population in Sarajevo, that was... You can have a siege. Gaza siege is lawful, by the way. The UN said it as well. You can have a siege on the enemy, but not on the... you can't starve a civilian population. So, first of all, that's the obligation. Now let's go to the facts and the lies and unlies and is anything going in there? And also, once it's going in, who's getting it and what is happening? Hamas is, what we heard is that the minute Israel IDF, IDF controlled Rafah, then all of a sudden the price of sugar and the price of flour and everything just shrunk for times 80 less, which means that Hamas and Egypt were actually economizing on their own people's grief, So these are all things that we need, the world, we need us, first of all, to answer these questions. Israeli citizens have to know the facts as well. The world needs to know the fact, that democracies need to know the facts. But it also brings another sort of player into this war, which is, I'm emphasizing on the legal front, there's the military, but there's also this war on information and the fake news, and it's part of this war. It's part of hybrid warfare. And I think the key word here in the Gaza war, it's not the first war that this is important, but it's creativity. It's how do we fight smarter against a more sophisticated enemy who doesn't look like an army. It's not Napoleon and armies against armies, or Ukraine, with the armies are there, even though it is on urban cities and urban areas. So, for example, I don't know if it's Israel. Let's say it probably is Israel. Hezbollah beepers blowing up. That's creativity. If you talked about proportionality, we have to be more creative. We have to be smarter, and that's really our genus. If we have some kind of historical advantage, we have to use that. And it's not about using the most might, the most power. It's using our power more intelligently. And we know how to do that. We can do that.
But on top of that, and lies and damn lies and statistics, there's another problem, and you mentioned that's TikTok. Now, one of the problems of Israel is many soldiers, service men and women, taking videos of them dedicating the explosion of this building to this and that, to their friend, torching a building, destroying another building in the name of whatever. And I wanted to ask you, Colonel, as a commander, is this something that can be controlled by commanders in the modern battlefield? Can you control with the spread of cell phones, of cameras, can you control that feed coming out of the battlefield, which right now is flowing without control?
It's very hard, and it's not just the Israeli army that has suffered from this. The British army has, the American army has, in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere, where soldiers, some soldiers in Britain, one soldier in particular in Britain, was convicted of murder on the basis of a video he took of his soldiers' actions in Afghanistan. So it's a huge problem that exists, that didn't exist maybe 20 years ago. It does today. How do you control it? Well, I've asked the IDF commanders many times why they're not controlling it better, and maybe it's an easy question to ask, but I think, you know, I would have thought you take all of the mobile phones off them, all of the cameras off them that aren't legitimate, or official cameras, so that they can't simply churn the stuff out. Now, I guess there's some reason why that hasn't happened.
Well, it works with the regular army. It doesn't really work with reservists.
I understand that as well, but it is a real problem. I agree.
So I want to chime in because the topic is ethics, which is, as a professional military that follows both a moral and an ethical code like Western militaries do, like the IDF absolutely do, is that soldiers do bad things. There are soldiers that do bad things in war. The ethical part is this is not who we are, and those people are, there is a justice system. If they are identified, and then they're processed through the justice system. That's what an ethical, moral military does. This is the complexity, and especially of urban combat, the belief that footage is there. Absolutely, I'm not denying soldiers do bad things. They're held accountable. All militaries have suffered through that in massive events. And again, I think it is all of the things that the IDF have done that they should get credit for, that's not what people are looking for.
But if you
there
touch
has
on
been
that,
accountability.
and I want to expand on that,
Accountability, yeah.
this war happens after, for many years Israel took pride of its judiciary and the way it scrutinizes both the military and the government. And this war occurs after a year in which the government is leading a declared policy of undermining the authority of the judiciary, cutting down the authority that they have on monitoring the activities of the executive branches. How much does that affect Israel's position in international bodies, such as the ICC or the ICJ? How much does it weaken our position when they say, look, you yourself are saying that you are trying to undermine your own judiciary, so why should we trust your judiciary?
So Israel just filed its response to the ICC, International Criminal Court, where I'm also leading a prosecution there for the victims of October 7, in parallel to the 3 arrest warrants against 3 Hamas leaders, one of them presumably dead, 2 arrest warrants, one against Prime Minister, one against Yoav Gallant, the Minister of Defense. These are arrest warrants the prosecutor of the ICC, Karim Khan, is asking for, and during this procedure now, Israel filed for the first time, this is historical, an official filing to the court against jurisdiction and against admissibility exactly on this issue, Alon. So this happened Friday, so after our talk actually. And one of the arguments there is, the international jurisdiction is complementary. It acts only when domestic jurisdiction cannot or will not act. And the arguments there are the ICC prosecutor advanced to ask for arrest warrants, the arguments that are openly known because this is not a public document, before Israel got the chance to exhaust its sovereignty or its internal processes. And usually it has a month to do so. The prosecutor is supposed to say arrest warrants are going to be issued. You have a month to respond and tell me what happens. There's another thing that wasn't told, but we can go back to 20th of May 2024 when the ICC prosecutor made a statement where Secretary of State Blinken said, this is a shocking statement, especially knowing, and I don't know if it's true, but I'm presuming Secretary of State Blinken knows better than I do. This is shocking because ICC prosecutor investigators were on the plane to go and meet with Netanyahu, while these arrest warrants were being, declared. And as a prosecutor, you have to think, as a prosecutor, you do not issue arrest warrants before you exhaust everything. You first investigate until the end, and then you make this dramatic, very foreseeably dramatic action. So one of Israel's arguments today to the world is, let us implement our judiciary because we have an amazing judiciary, because we're very strong. We have a resilient democracy. I think actually we have a chance because I think there are things not known to the public, of course, about possible, let's say, inquiry commissions and so forth that could answer the requirements of the ICC, same as in the UK and Iraq investigation at the ICC, the UK military had investigations of UK soldiers. Here we're talking about, of course, higher ranks. It has to be directly on the involvement of Prime Minister, or alleged involvement of Prime Minister and Minister of Defense in the actual accusations.
So even those institutions are affected by the way we are portrayed in the media, whether traditional or social. And I want to ask you this. You know, we had a few days of grace after the massacre because we were in the form in which the world loves us, victims. But then it passed. And then the narrative is always the same. You've got the tanks, you've got the F-16s, you've got the sophisticated weapons. These guys are fighting with AK-47s in the tunnels. So that makes you the white people, that makes them the indigenous people, and we support the underdog. Is there a way out of that, or this is a lost war? There's no way to win that. What do you think, Colonel?
First of all, I'd say about the ICC and the ICJ, and I've spent many weeks studying the work they've been doing and doing what small amount I can to try and rebut it. These are kangaroo courts. They're political courts. They are unaccountable. They're accountable to nobody except themselves. There's no political accountability for either of these two courts. Both of them, particularly the ICC, the ICJ's entertaining charges of genocide against Israel is, I don't need to explain why, is an obscenity with no evidence whatsoever to support that charge. No evidence has been brought forward for it. But they both violated their own charters, their own terms. They've contorted themselves, particularly the ICC, contorted themselves into a situation where they can do their damnedest to get the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister of Israel into the dock in The Hague. All you have to do is look at it to understand the absurdity of the whole thing. So I think that we're on a losing wicket in many ways, because these aren't going to back down. They're not going to. I mean, it may be that the charges don't come to fruition in either case. Potentially, they don't even get any further than they are now. But a lot of damage has been done. You just look on social media, look on mainstream media, and you'll see that the ICJ said there is a plausible case of genocide. It isn't true. They didn't say that, but that's what the media report. So it's really, the whole thing is really an absolute obscenity. And I think my view is, in relation to, we haven't got that far with the ICJ yet, but my view is that the United States, who are the only country with the power really to do it effectively, should sanction the International Criminal Court for abusing their ally Israel in the way they have.
So I disagree, respectfully disagree. I think that would only nourish exactly the narratives and the myths of, we were talking about the white, the WASP, let's say, and the indigenous, and just sanctioning and everything, an international criminal court that obliges 124 countries, not the US, it's true, that would only nourish this bully narrative and everything. And if we're talking about narratives, and narratives do count, there are actually effective, judicial, legally founded ways to fight. And we have a wonderful case because Israel is not committing genocide there. Israel is, it's a military of the people. It's people on the street who have regular lives, have gone out of their houses to defend themselves and so forth. And they come back a day after or a weekend after. It's not like Vietnam, that they went so far away that they lost it, or any sense of social cohesion and social, explain to their mothers what they do there. Their mothers wouldn't have let them go there if they were committing genocide and so forth. And there is the fact of military hierarchy, not only for Israel's or the IDF's morality, but also for IDF's military necessity. The military needs soldiers to only target military objectives and not go after, civilian. And that's why our IDF is not doing that. It's fighting a war against a very vicious enemy who is presenting all of us with the cruelest dilemmas every day, including Israeli society, including what do we do with hostages, how do we save people, how is it that Hamas videos are saying exactly what families of hostages are saying? I mean, Hamas has created an unbearable reality, and we have to deal with that, and we have to deal with that while remaining who we are as a society and as individuals. So of course we're not committing genocide, but we have to fight the good fight. And also, I mean, I just personally don't think it nourishes like a good cause to, maybe they are kangaroo courts, they have their rules, they have their procedures, let's fight them with their procedures. Like legally, we have the might to do that, and I have the confidence that we have everything that we need, like, you know, in terms of knowledge and capacity, and Israel is actually doing that. I wish Israel would do that and at the same time tell Israel's civilians that they're doing that as much, because there's a lot of dissonance between what Israel and Ministry of Justice and amazing professionals are actually doing at these courts and what they're telling their own citizens.
So I'll meet in the middle. So I'm not Israeli, I'm not Jewish, I'm pro-truth. So for these multinational organizations which we established after World War II to prevent wars, they should take ownership in their own conduct. So when the ICJ's ruling is taken by the world, and the former president of the ICJ has to explain, no, that's not what we meant, but nobody cared, then you, organizations, need to take ownership of how your message is being received and be more vocal to include the United Nations on condemning Hamas for every action that it's taken in violation of every law that's ever been created in war.
So before we conclude, I promise that we'll take a few questions from the crowd, please.
Thank you so much to all of you. My question's for Yael. Is there... Stand up, yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you so much to all of you for speaking. My question's for Yael in terms of international law. And you don't have to answer if you can't answer, but is there a case right now against Iran and the Islamic regime or certain members against them for the atrocities of October 7th and the ongoing both physical war that's taking place in Israel and around the world in terms of the hypocritical, the propaganda that's being spread?
Thank you for that very important question. So you're actually... yes, an excellent question about, from the lady here, is Iran or the Republic, you know, is Iran in front of the courts today also dealing with accountability for its responsibility for October 7 atrocities committed by Hamas and their accomplices? Is Iran on the dock? I'll say that it's a wonderful question because it opens up the whole topic that this is what I'm devoting my life to for 20 years, but specifically since October 7, for the victims. I created this organization called October 7 Justice Without Borders, and part of it, so we're talking about, it's called strategic litigation. You have to litigate strategically against states supporting terrorism, against individuals committing atrocities, and against corporate entities who are financing it. And so there are already a set of civil lawsuits in the US. There should be, at the ICJ, there should be a state action under the same convention, Article 11, that South Africa brought Israel under the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. Iran is inciting for genocide. Genocide is the only international crime where you commit it only by inciting for it. So incitement to genocide, Iran has been committing that for decades in the writing in daylight. It's not shying away from it. So definitely there has to be accountability. War by proxy. Have we had any other? This is a solid case. So a lot of it is in the building, but we also need states to jump in to do their. I'm an independent attorney. We're working with a lot of other. We're a private entity. Part of our independence is not receiving support from the state. We're only based on philanthropical, etc. donations. So we also need states to, sovereign states to jump in there and say, this is what we need to do. We need, international action. It can be vis-a-vis UN mechanisms. UN treaty, human rights treaty bodies, and actually we're working on that. But we need states to go to the International Court of Justice. We need states to do that. These are the entities of power. So use it not only in the battlefield, but in the legal battlefield, the legal front.
The ICC chief prosecutor has applied to bring charges against, or to arrest warrants against 3 senior Hamas officials. Yeah, but of course it means nothing. It's purely a cover. It's purely a cover to show how even-handed they are. It means nothing. It will have no effect on Hamas. And also, 2 of them, fortunately, have already been crossed out by the IDF.
The only thing I'll add is that I do comparative analysis, part of research, like comparing, well, how does this look? What is the standard in which Israel is being asked to follow? I believe in the laws of war and think all the laws of war should be upheld. If you want a comparison, the ICC didn't apply for an application. There's currently an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin for actually stealing babies out of Ukraine and sending them into Russia. That's an actual act of genocide. The ICJ actually ruled that Russia needed to stop its invasion of Ukraine. So if you want comparative analysis, when there is no evidence, there's actually a whole fields of evidence that Israel is not committing genocide. There's actually 0 evidence that they are.
So 2 questions to follow up, especially on So 2 questions, 1 to follow on. Can you speak up?
I can speak up and then I'll say, yeah, go.
So 2 questions. 1, based on the concept of equal justice, are you not convinced, as the general is, that it is a political body and not a truth-seeking body? 1, for the ICC and ICJ. And 2, do you not think that in the new warfare that we're dealing with, that civilians need to know that if they're around a terrorist, their blood is
Permitted?
vulnerable? Yes.
Well, let me tell
Do
you
they
that
have the choice?
No
I don't
one in
know, under
Lebanon is going to
Hamas,
sit
but yeah.
next to a Hezbollah person now. No one wants to sit next to them.
Yeah. So first question, just to transmit to others who can hear, equality of justice, is the ICC and ICJ a truth-seeking body or a politicized body? And then the second question, shouldn't civilians know that if they're sitting around Hamas, their blood is permitted, right? So the first question, ICC and ICJ are very different. ICJ is the court between states, and ICC is the court for individuals. It's like the legacy of Nuremberg, the Nazi war criminals. It's an idea that Israel and the Jewish people invented. I would like to see, that we're part of it. It was manipulated when it was a diplomatic conference, writing down what are the crimes in this convention. It's an international convention written by states. On one article on the direct or indirect transfer of an occupier's own population into an occupied land. This is the one article that made Israel not sign this. It signed it but didn't ratify it, so it's not part of the International Criminal Court. I'd like to see that change one day. I think that'll be historical justice. Again, we invented this court, International Criminal Court. For me, I wrote the ICC prosecutor. I was the first one to write him in the name of victims of October 7. I did that after 2 years ago. I wrote an amicus curiae, which is a friend of the court sort of writing about why the ICC does not have jurisdiction, not for political reasons, but under its own rules, because of the principle of legality and how you interpret criminal law very restrictively. You're not allowed to be creative about it. Either it's a state or it's not a state, and there's no such thing as a Palestine state for the purposes of the Rome Statute, so that's an invention. So I wrote that, no jurisdiction for ICC, and then I wrote the first complaint to the ICC prosecutor saying, if you have jurisdiction, apply it here to the people here, because there are crimes committed here, atrocities, genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, either by extermination or murder or torture or rape or acts of a sexual character or pillage or other things under your jurisdiction, so please apply it. And I'm here, we're here, professionals on the ground, directly in contact with the victims to tell their stories, so truth-seeking. And this was on the 31st of October. And since early days of November, I've been in direct contact with investigators of the ICC, I can say it, and it's actually a truth-seeking mission, and part of these arrest warrants, it's true against the 3 highest ones. I'm actually looking for number 1 till 20. That'll make the difference. Not the 3 symbolic ones, which are an amazing achievement, but not enough. I believe there is a truth-seeking there. I'm only very sorry for the victims I represent, and also for, victim is you can broaden the definition, that it was the arrest warrants against against Hamas and the arrest warrants requested against Prime Minister and Minister of Defense were declared in the same breath. For me, give the victims 1 hour. Give victims of Hamas atrocities 1 hour. 8 a.m., declare arrest warrants against Hamas leaders for atrocities of mankind that, shock the conscience of humanity. If you want to request arrest warrants against the highest ranking Israeli officials, a democracy that is not a state party, then do that at 9 a.m., please. Give them this 1 hour, because obviously, in fact, you are creating an artificial symmetry between these two cases, and there is no symmetry. It's a completely separate and different trier of fact and law that has to do with And actually, what I asked the court asked my opinion as a representative of victims of October 7 atrocities. He said, what is your opinion about the arrest warrants? I didn't file it myself. A lot of 70, over 100 filed to the court and said, tell us your opinion. So they asked my opinion, and I said, whatever you decide, do it on the basis of your rules, truth, exactly, facts and evidence, but declare it separately and do it on the basis of law. Don't reinvent law. There's too many precedents in this case since its beginning. I don't know if I answered your question. The second question...
We made it easier to the court by shortening the list of Hamas leaders. One last question here, and then we'll wrap up.
How you doing? John, this question is for you. I'm going to give you a little brief context. Can you hear me? Cool. John, this question is for you. I run a YouTube channel, which has grown to be the largest one of the Middle East, solo run, doing Israel advocacy. You're a big part of that with the information that you have. Now, with all of this information, I didn't serve in the IDF. I moved to Israel, so I decided to enlist myself into my own army service to fight this propaganda war. But it's very hard for me to measure my work, because I've found that the past 11 months I'm dealing with a lot of overly emotional and underly informed individuals. My community on YouTube is Christian, Catholic, and Muslim, and some Jewish people. The information that I've received from you on the internet is profound information that I find very hard to get to the right people. All of us in this room understand and hear this information, know it to be very factual. The people that need to be hearing it aren't hearing it. Your interview with Ben Shapiro, he said something that I'll never forget. He said that this is the first time in the world that 15 and 16-year-olds are having access to war on TikTok. They are seeing war unfold. And so I find that this information that I've found so valuable from you as the leading world expert in modern warfare means really to the people who need to hear it, kind of nothing, because they always comment with, yeah, but the kids, but the women. Given the context, the short one that I just gave you, what do you suggest is an approach for me to try and talk to these individuals being so overly emotional and underly informed?
So that's a tough one, and I fight in this space because I believe in the truth. I believe that this is indicative of the future. If this is allowed to stand where the truth, it doesn't matter. It only matters what people believe. One of the things that if I was king of the world, I would put out one understanding that that innocents being harmed, especially children, evokes immense emotion, to include in me. And any soldier that I ever served with who saw a child wounded in any way, it tore them up, even moral injury. Even if you know the U.S. military history, the first battle of Fallujah, it was Al Jazeera airing of children that had been harmed. The message absolutely has to be shown on what all the IDF in this case is doing to prevent it. But it's really hard because children, kids, to include my child who comes home from school and says, Dad, is Hamas the good guys? Luckily they have me as a dad. But we're in a world where the world has forgot what war looks like. We're in a world where the world has forgotten, to include people who are in positions of power, what the laws of war actually say and why they say the things they do. That they're not quantitative, they're qualitative, they're context driven. That we need classes on War 101. This is the level, I believe in the social media space. I engage in it. But we always assume one thing, that the other person knows what we're talking about. And I've found just as somebody who talks about war, like that, they're not understanding anything to do with war. Like, why don't you just stop? All the killing will stop. And then we have the biggest problem, though, which I think gets to that question that's very emotive, is that we, to include, our greatest universities are creating the dumbest people. They project their values on the other person they view as the victim. So this is where I would engage in a multiple conversations about what does Hamas say that they want? What does Hamas do to ensure their civilians are harmed? What does even the tunnel system, that all 2.2 million of the Palestinian people in Gaza who weren't, because of Egypt, allowed out, could fit in Hamas's tunnel with ease, but there is no civilians, there's only Israeli hostages being starved in tunnels. I don't know how to approach the problem, but it literally is dumbing it down, where we have a problem in critical thinking, as Ben and other people address, is where we have to find a way to get a message within that emotion to, okay, wait for a minute, now in this horrible situation, which I'm not gonna tell you it didn't happen, who caused it, what's the context? In my world, context is everything. But because of these 30-second clips, I can remove all the context to show you the emotion. It's almost like we have to have a digital literacy starting at kindergarten, really, of what are you watching? Ask the question of what is the context to this, what you're watching. So I know that's not an answer. Thanks for what you're doing to fight in that fight.
I think language changing is based on, it's going to sound a bit, but love. Because, that screen, that social media brings so much distance between us, and we can't see the hurt that we create in the other. But if you speak to those people who are saying ludicrous things, if you treat them like you would treat your son, your child, with love, like your starting point should be that they're so angry, they're so emotional because they're using their good values to the wrong cause or to the wrong facts. If you do that, that would already be a starter.
So this is more a question of marketing than ethics, but Colonel, what can we do better to market the truth to the world?
I think I go back to what I said at the beginning, which is that Israel is in the wrong. Israel is an illegitimate country. It shouldn't exist. From the river to the sea, it should be gone. That's the underlying narrative that's so dominant in the anti-Israel world. And until you address that, I think almost all of these details, the details are important for those people who are supporting Israel. The work that John does, for example, is very important ammunition for people who are supporting Israel. But ultimately, this issue of Israel's legitimacy really does need to be addressed. And a lot of the lies about illegal settlements, illegal occupation, apartheid, genocide, all of that somehow needs to be addressed. And I'm not suggesting it's easy or even maybe possible, but without that, then everything Israel does is wrong, come what may. Can I, are you about to chuck us out?
Well, go ahead.
I wanted to say, are we going to have more questions? Okay, sorry, yeah. I just want to say something at the end, if I may, because I love the sound of my own voice.
So let's wrap.
You've got a beautiful accent, so
Thank you.
Let's wrap.
Americans always think that British people are intelligent.
Let's wrap. Tons. Okay, one last.
Yes, ask.
To go back to your question about the influence that the United States could exert on the ICC without being a party state. So what was your concept of that in terms of boycotting the funding? Because the ICC is clearly a UN organ. So how would you...
It's independent. Assembly of State Parties, it's independent. No, it's not an organ of the UN. That's a common mistake. It happens, but I think, I don't know. The U.S. has an amazing unit for war crimes unit.
No, I
Rafik El Hariri, yes. So I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. I'm sorry.
So how would you, so since they've issued warrants, there is a potential that they could then use the warrants.
No, they haven't issued warrants yet. We're at the stage discussing the warrants, and usually it's totally ex parte. It's just the prosecutor with the judges, and this, for the first time, everyone has a say. And for the first time, Israel is filed something, and it's very important, and I think it's the right thing to do. I'm very happy that Israel is participating and not leaving the how do you say, Abama? The arena empty. Thank you. Thank you to all the wonderful translators and my jet lag. So for me, the important thing is not to leave the arena empty for these narratives, not your narrative, sir, but for the narratives of Israel is always in the wrong. And I have to say, the majority of the world is actually pro-Israel. And we should never be fatalistic about that, because at the end of the day, an individual wakes up and he knows what's right. And you can see, I was at the end of the world near Paris in a really empty, when the 6, Noah Argamani and the other amazing hostages were liberated. One of them is here, exactly. And I was in nowhere. And this French, non-white receptionist and I were looking at the screen, and I was, and then he says, at the end, democracies always win. And I was so shocked, because if you know a little bit about suburbia Paris, and it's not the most, they don't act out of the love of Israel. And so that's why I'm appealing to the world, not for the love of Israel. I'm appealing to the world because of the world's humanity, unconditional humanity. And I think this is what we should be talking about,
John, final word?
So final word, I am common of saying, because I've fallen into this world, that you can have your own opinions, you can't have your own facts. So this is, we live in a world where truth has to fight to get a seat at the table, but that is still the world where the truth still matters, facts still matter. And people always ask me, what can they do? I'm doing research. But what we all can do is fight. If we give up the information domain, then somebody else will spread the lies, and the lie becomes the truth. Everybody here, everybody out there, has to fight the lies with truth.
As my attorney says, truth is an option you shouldn't rule out immediately. Go ahead, Colonel.
I just wanted to say that I believe, having seen the IDF in action, not just in this war, but in previous wars as well, that every Israeli should be absolutely intensely proud of the young men and women. And they're not just young men and women. I came across an IDF soldier right on the Gaza border, who was standing there with a rifle guarding Kfar Aza on the 9th of October, I think it was, who was something like a 45-year-old British orthopedic surgeon who got on a plane and flown over. But the other thing I wanted to say is that I'm extremely optimistic about the outcome of this situation. I know it's a terrible situation we're all in, but I believe that, first of all, Israel is going to emerge from this war as a much stronger country than it went into it. I believe that Israel will emerge with its reputation intact, despite all the slander and the lies. And the fact that you've got generations of Israelis fighting for the lives of their country and their friends and their family will give an incredible depth of strength to the country. And the second reason I think Israel is going to emerge more strongly is because it's seen how important it is for it to be self-reliant. And I think we've already seen movements made towards greater self-reliance in weaponry and ammunition. And the third reason I think we have cause to be optimistic is because finally, and I apologize for going on like this, I know this is a Jewish event and there's food in a minute, and that's the most important thing. But finally, the diaspora, I think, the Jewish diaspora has at least begun to wake up. And I think they've seen the reality of the situation in the Middle East. And I think that will add even greater strength to Israel. Thank you very much.
Amen. Please join me in thanking those three amazing experts. John Spencer, Yael Gvirsman, Colonel Richard Kemp.